My name is Rachel. I am 28 years old, and yesterday I became a millionaire. I inherited $2 million in liquid assets, a Victorian mansion on 2 acres, and controlling shares of a thriving home decor business. The woman who left me everything was my Aunt Margaret, the only person who ever stayed when everyone else disappeared. I was still struggling to breathe through grief when the door opened and the 2 people I least expected stepped inside. My parents. The same parents who had walked out of my life 15 years ago without a goodbye. I froze. They smiled as if no time had passed, as if I were still a child waiting for them at the window. Their voices coated in sweetness, their faces lined by years I had not witnessed. It should have been a reunion filled with tears and apologies. Instead, it was an ambush. Because behind every soft word I saw calculation. And behind every smile I saw hunger. That moment cracked something inside me. All my life, I had carried a fantasy that maybe one day they would come back, that they would explain why they left, and we would piece together what was broken. But when they appeared in that lawyer's office, I realized the truth. They had come for money, not for me. I could feel the air tightening around me, the weight of 15 lost years pressing against my chest. This was supposed to be the day I honored Margaret, the day I carried her legacy forward. Instead, it became the day my past clawed its way back into my life. I remember gripping the arm of the leather chair, trying to steady myself. The sound of my mother's voice was a ghost, familiar, yet foreign. My father's eyes scanned the room, not at me, but at the thick folders on the lawyer's desk. Every detail of that moment is carved into me. The smell of old books, the shadow of the chandelier, the tremor in my own hands. And in that moment, a thought cut through the noise. If they had abandoned me once, what stopped them from doing it again? The answer was simple. Nothing. Nothing had changed except the size of the inheritance I now carried. I need you to understand something before we go further. This is not just a story about money. It is about abandonment, betrayal, and the cost of hope. It is about what happens when blood ties turn toxic and how you decide for yourself who deserves to be called family. What followed after their return was a battle not of fists, but of truths. A battle over my past, my future, and my very identity. And I will tell you everything detail by detail so you can see how a girl left behind at 13 stood her ground at 28. Before I dive deeper, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you are watching right now and you have ever dealt with betrayal inside your own family, you know how sharp that pain cuts. You know the silence at the dinner table, the absence at milestones, the ache of waiting for someone who never comes. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Share if you have ever faced toxic family members. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to join this community. Because this is not just my story, it might be yours too. So, that was the beginning. The day wealth and grief collided. The day ghosts from my past stepped through a polished wooden door and tried to rewrite my life. They thought they could smile their way into my fortune. They thought 15 years of silence could be erased with a hug and a sad excuse. But they were wrong. And what came next would prove that sometimes family is not defined by DNA, but by who stays when it matters most. The first shock of seeing my parents after 15 years had left my body stiff and my mind spinning. But in the silence that followed, the lawyer Mr. Whitman cleared his throat, steady and deliberate, as if reminding me that I was not alone in that room. My parents were not here for a warm embrace. They were here for something else. I could feel it. They sat across from me, smiling too widely, their voices dripping with artificial sweetness. My mother's hand reached for mine, but I pulled back, pretending to adjust my sleeve. My father leaned forward, speaking softly. "Rachel, we are your guardians. We have always been your family." The words cut like glass. Guardians. Where were those guardians when I was 13, alone in an empty apartment, wondering why they left me? Before I could answer, Mr. Whitman pushed open the heavy oak door, entering with a stack of folders in his hands. He looked at my parents over the rim of his glasses, and I watched their faces drain of color. They had expected me to be defenseless, but Margaret had made sure I was not. I wanted to shout. I wanted to ask them why now, why after 15 years of silence, Why, only after the obituary of Margaret appeared in the newspaper. But I swallowed it down. Not yet. I needed to listen, observe, and control the storm building inside me. And this is where I turn to you, the ones watching, the ones listening. Have you ever faced someone toxic in your family? Someone who vanished when you needed them only to return when you had something they wanted? If you know that pain, share your story in the comments. Let others see they are not alone. And if you believe voices like ours deserve to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe. Together we build a community where silence no longer wins. I returned to the moment in that office. My mother's perfume filled the air, painfully familiar, yet wrong like a memory spoiled by time. My father's eyes flickered between me and the lawyer's files, restless, calculating. I wanted to believe their smiles. I wanted to believe they had come back because they missed me, because they loved me. But their timing told another story. Rachel, my mother said gently, we never stopped thinking about you. We just didn't know how to reach you. Her words floated across the table like a cheap sales pitch. My father added, we followed the news, we saw the obituary, and here you are, all grown up, successful, just like Margaret would have wanted. I nodded, but the silence inside me was louder than their words. Successful because of Margaret, not because of them. Safe because of her walls, her rules, her sacrifices, not theirs. Every second of that meeting felt surreal, like watching actors perform a play about my life. My parents dressed in clothes that had once been fashionable, trying to pretend they had never walked away. Mr. Whitman stoic, waiting for the right moment to break the performance. And me caught between grief for the woman I had lost and the rage for the two who had returned. I want you to understand something. Hope is dangerous. For years I had carried the hope that they would come back, that one day I would wake up and they would be at the door, apologizing, ready to rebuild. And in that office, I finally saw the truth. Hope had kept me chained to a fantasy. Reality was harsher, but reality also set me free. Mr. Whitman spoke at last, his tone calm, but edged with authority. We will begin shortly. Rachel, please take a seat. There are matters to clarify before any discussion proceeds. My parents shifted uneasily. The confidence in their smiles cracked just slightly, but I caught it. That was the first sign they were not here for me. They were here for Margaret's fortune. And in that moment, sitting under the shadow of that chandelier, I made a promise to myself. Whatever happened next, I would not be the powerless 13-year-old girl they abandoned. I would not let them twist my life into their story again. This was my inheritance, my legacy, and my choice. The lawyer shuffled his papers. My parents leaned closer. My pulse hammered in my ears. The war for my future had begun, and I was ready this time. When I think back to the life I once had before everything collapsed, it almost feels like a dream. My name is Rachel, and long before millions of dollars in courtrooms filled with lawyers, I was just a girl in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was not glamorous, but it was ours. My father worked as a sales manager at a small car dealership. My mother taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We did not have wealth, but we had enough. And enough felt like happiness. Fridays were my favorite. We would rent movies from the corner store, pop bags of microwave popcorn, and laugh together on our old couch until we fell asleep. Summers meant camping trips in a secondhand tent, my father teaching me how to build a fire, my mother pointing out constellations as if the sky was a map she had memorized. Christmas mornings smelled like cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate, with wrapping paper scattered across the carpet like colorful snow. These were the images that told me I was safe, that family meant love. Family. But behind closed doors, the cracks were forming. My parents thought they hid it well. They did not. I heard the whispered arguments late at night, saw the way my mother's smile dimmed when she hung up the phone after one of my father's mysterious calls. I smelled the cigarettes and alcohol clinging to his jacket when he claimed to be working overtime. And though I was young, I was not blind. It started small poker nights with friends. I remember thinking it was harmless, even fun. But the poker nights grew into weekend trips to Atlantic City. I woke up to my mother crying in the kitchen, begging him to stop before we lost everything. He promised he would quit. Promises became like spare change in his pocket, tossed out, quickly forgotten just as fast. My mother began to change too. The vibrant teacher who once filled our house with stories and laughter started calling in sick. Days would pass with her lying in bed, the curtains pulled tight, her body still, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. The refrigerator emptied, and, when I asked about groceries, her voice snapped sharp and cold. Sometimes she looked at me as if she were memorizing my face, then broke into tears, locking herself in the bathroom. So I tried to fix it the only way a 13-year-old could. I worked harder in school. I cleaned the apartment without being asked. I wore the same clothes until the fabric wore thin, hoping if I was perfect enough I could hold them together. Perfection became my shield against the chaos unraveling around me. But perfection was not enough. I remember one Tuesday morning in October, the air colder than it should have been. I woke up late. My mother had not shaken me awake like she always did. The apartment felt strange, too quiet. I walked to their bedroom. The door, always shut during her dark days, was wide open. The closet, half empty. Drawers pulled out with only socks left behind. And then on the kitchen counter, a single sheet of paper. 16 words in my mother's handwriting that would cut deeper than any blade. Rachel, we cannot do this anymore. Your Aunt Margaret will take care of you. We are sorry. 13 years of memories reduced to 16 words. I called their cell phones until my fingers shook. No one answered. My father's number was already disconnected. I searched through drawers for any contact, any clue. Nothing. The walls of that apartment, once filled with warmth, pressed down like a coffin. That night I sat by the phone with a bowl of cereal waiting for it to ring. It never did. The next day the landlord came demanding rent, his eyes suspicious as he mentioned calling social services. By the third day fear broke me. I called my school counselor, confessing the truth I had tried to hide. That call changed everything. Miss Dawson, a social worker with kind eyes, stepped into my life. She made calls, pulled strings, and somehow reached my Aunt Margaret. Within 24 hours, a black car rolled up outside our crumbling building. Out stepped the woman who would change the course of my life. But that moment, standing in a half-empty apartment, clutching a note that told me I was disposable, would never leave me. It carved itself into my bones, a wound that years of therapy only dulled, never erased. And maybe that is why, 15 years later, when my parents walked back into my life, I felt no warmth. Only the echo of that Tuesday morning, and the knowledge that some scars never fully heal. The memory of that Tuesday morning never really faded. It was carved into me the way lightning scars a tree, sudden and permanent. I was 13 years old, still half asleep, when I realized the silence in our apartment was wrong. My mother always moved through the kitchen early, the smell of coffee filling the rooms. That day there was nothing, no voices, no movement, only stillness. At first I thought maybe they had gone to work early, but the longer I looked, the more I saw the truth. The closet in their bedroom stood half empty. Hangers swayed gently bare and accusing. Drawers were left pulled out, only a few socks and scraps of paper inside. I remember touching the dresser cold beneath my fingers, as if even the furniture knew something was missing. Then on the counter, a note. One piece of paper, 16 words written in my mother's familiar handwriting. Rachel, we cannot do this anymore. Your Aunt Margaret will take care of you. We are sorry. I read it again and again, waiting for it to change, waiting for some hidden message to appear. But it stayed the same. Final. Sharp. Cruel. I called my mother's cell phone until my ears hurt from the endless ringing. No answer. I tried my father's number, but it had already been disconnected. Panic turned to desperation. I searched through drawers for an address book, old letters, anything. Nothing. They had erased themselves from my world. That night I made myself a bowl of cereal and sat on the couch staring at the phone. Every sound outside made me jump, certain they were coming back. I fell asleep, waiting the untouched cereal soggy in the bowl beside me. The second day was worse. Hunger gnawed at me, but fear gnawed deeper. I stayed inside, too terrified to tell anyone. If I spoke the truth, would they put me in foster care? Would my parents return and find me gone? The thought of missing them if they came back kept me frozen in that apartment. By the third day, our landlord knocked on the door, demanding overdue rent. His eyes narrowed when I told him my parents were away. He muttered something about calling social services. That was the moment I knew hiding was no longer possible. I broke down and told my school counselor. She listened, her face pale, before dialing numbers I didn't understand. Hours later, a woman arrived. Miss Dawson, a social worker with warm eyes and a voice that softened the edges of my fear. She told me I couldn't stay alone any longer. That night would be the last one in that apartment. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped Aunt Margaret. She was everything my parents were not: composed, confident, decisive. Her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her charcoal suit pressed without a wrinkle. She didn't hug me, she didn't cry, she simply said, "Pack what you can carry. The rest will come later." I stuffed clothes into a suitcase, crammed photo albums and favorite books into my backpack, and stood one last time in the bedroom where glow-in-the-dark stars clung to the ceiling. I wanted to peel them down, but my hands shook too much. That was the last time I saw that apartment. The ride to Margaret's house took 3 hours. I watched the city fade behind me in the rearview mirror, my life disappearing mile by mile. She asked if I was hungry, if I needed a bathroom break, and otherwise said nothing. Her tone was clipped but not unkind. It felt less like a rescue and more like a transfer of custody. But at least she showed up. For weeks after, I woke in the middle of the night, convinced I had heard the door creak open. I wrote letters I never sent. I scanned crowds, sure I had glimpsed my mother's blonde hair or my father's stride. The hope that they might come back clung to me like smoke. It took years before I understood the truth. They hadn't just left me, they had chosen to leave me. That realization hurt more than the note, more than the silence, more than the empty apartment. And 15 years later, when they reappeared with smiles on their faces, I remembered that October morning. And I remembered how it felt to hold that piece of paper, knowing love had been replaced with absence. That memory became my armor. The day Aunt Margaret came into my life is etched into my memory with the clarity of glass. I was 13, standing in the dim hallway of our apartment, my small suitcase beside me, the social worker hovering like a gentle shield. Then the black car pulled up. Sleek, polished, and entirely out of place against the cracked pavement and rusted bicycles that littered the block. Out stepped the woman who would change everything. She was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit, pearls at her neck, her silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it had never known a loose strand. Her eyes swept the building with a faint trace of disapproval before settling on me. There was no smile, no open arms, only a steady voice. "Pack what you can carry. The rest will be arranged later." That was it. No questions, no apologies for my parents, just instruction. I should have felt abandoned all over again. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in days' stability. I carried my bag down the stairs, each step echoing with the weight of leaving behind everything I thought I knew. My glow-in-the-dark stars still clung to the ceiling of my bedroom, my childhood drawings taped to the wall, but I didn't look back. Some part of me already understood that my life had shifted permanently. The ride to Margaret's house was silent, except for her occasional, almost mechanical questions. "Hungry. Do you need a bathroom break?" I answered quietly, clutching my backpack like it was a life vest. Outside the window, my city disappeared, replaced by highways, then rolling fields, then neighborhoods, so pristine they felt unreal. After 3 hours, we turned down a long driveway lined with oak trees. At the end stood her house. No, not a house, a mansion. It was Victorian, sprawling, surrounded by wrought iron gates and acres of manicured gardens. My room inside was larger than our old apartment. Heavy velvet curtains hung over tall windows, and an antique 4-poster bed stood like a monument in the center. I felt like I had stepped into a novel I didn't belong in. Margaret's rules came quickly: breakfast at 7 sharp, beds made before leaving for school, shoes never on the hardwood floors, 1 hour of piano practice daily whether I liked it or not. Homework at a desk never sprawled across a bed or couch. Dinner conversation required at least one current event and one personal achievement. No television on weeknights. It was overwhelming, suffocating even. I tested her boundaries, skipped breakfast, ignored assignments, left clothes on the floor. A part of me expected, no, hoped that she would grow tired of me and send me away. Better to be rejected now than abandoned later. But she never threatened to send me back. Instead, every infraction had a consequence. Late to breakfast. The kitchen closed at 7:30, homework incomplete. Weekend plans canceled until it was done. There was no yelling, no empty threats, just consistency. One night I found her sitting outside my room as I cried over an old photo of my parents. I expected anger, a sharp word about wasting time on the past. Instead, she handed me a handkerchief and sat beside me in silence until the tears slowed. Another time after I failed a math test despite studying, she didn't scold. She hired a tutor. It was confusing. She was not warm, not affectionate, but she showed up. Always. And after being left behind, presence meant everything. That first year in Margaret's house felt like learning a new language. The language of rules, of order, of expectations. I stumbled, rebelled, resented. Yet slowly I began to understand what she was offering. It wasn't kindness in the way I craved, but it was structure, safety. And after the chaos of my parents' world, that structure felt like oxygen. Looking back now, I realize that day, she arrived in her black car. She did not just take me into her home. She took me into her world, her values, her relentless determination. I didn't know it then, but she was planting the seeds that would one day allow me to stand on my own unshaken, even when my past came knocking again. My life inside Aunt Margaret's mansion was like stepping into another universe. Gone were the casual evenings with popcorn and rented movies. Gone were the lazy mornings when my mother let me sleep in. Here, everything had a schedule, everything had a rule, and nothing was left to chance. At first, I hated it. I felt like a guest in a museum tiptoeing around antiques that seemed more valuable than I was. Breakfast was at 7 sharp. If I arrived late, the kitchen was closed, and Margaret would calmly remind me of the rule as she sipped her coffee. Beds had to be made before leaving the room. Shoes were forbidden on the polished hardwood floors. Homework was done at the desk, never sprawled on the bed. Piano practice for 1 hour every day. No exceptions, no excuses. Dinner was formal. We sat across from each other at a long table where I was expected to discuss one current event and one personal achievement. And if I didn't have a personal achievement, she would raise an eyebrow and say, "Then your day lacked purpose." At 13, it felt suffocating. I rebelled in small ways. I skipped breakfast just to prove she couldn't control me. I left homework undone. I slammed doors, left clothes on the floor, and ignored her piano. Deep down, part of me wanted her to lose patience to send me away. Because if she sent me away first, at least I wouldn't have to watch her leave like my parents did. But Margaret didn't send me away, not once. Every rule I broke had a consequence, yes, but it was steady, predictable. If I missed breakfast, I went hungry until lunch. If I left homework undone, my weekend plans vanished. No shouting, no threats, just structure. It was maddening and strangely comforting. The moments that surprised me most, though, were when her iron mask slipped. Like the night she found me clutching a photo of my parents, tears streaming down my face. I braced for a lecture. Instead, she handed me a folded handkerchief and sat quietly beside me until the sobs eased. Or the time I failed a math test, despite studying for hours. I expected sharp words about wasted effort. Instead, she hired a tutor the very next day. She didn't coddle, she didn't say she loved me, but she showed up every single day. And after what I'd endured, that kind of presence meant more than words ever could. Her love, if you could call it that, was buried beneath rules and discipline. But it was there. I saw it in the way she drove 3 hours to sit through every court hearing during my guardianship process. I saw it in the way she forced herself home from business trips to make sure we ate dinner together. I saw it in the way she never missed a school event, no matter how small. At the time, I resented the structure. I thought she was trying to erase me and mold me into her own image. But slowly, I began to understand. Structure was her way of keeping me safe. She knew what chaos looked like, and she refused to let me drown in it again. It was confusing learning that love could wear so many faces. My parents had given me affection, but no safety. Margaret gave me safety, but little affection. And yet it was her version that saved me. Looking back now, I realized that every rule, every consequence, every quiet act of consistency was her way of saying what she never said aloud: "I will not abandon you." That lesson, the idea that love is proven by presence, not promises, would stay with me. It would prepare me for the battles still to come, when the people who had abandoned me would one day return, pretending they still had the right to call themselves my family. But in those early years, all I knew was that Margaret was different. She was unyielding. She was exacting, and she was permanent. And permanence to a child left behind is the purest form of love. As the months passed in Margaret's house, the rules that once felt like shackles began to reveal something I had never recognized before they carried lessons. Every demand, every expectation, every neatly enforced boundary was her way of teaching me how to live in a world that had already proven cruel. One night I remember sobbing over a pile of geometry proofs. Numbers blurred through my tears, my hands shaking with the weight of failure. I slammed my pencil on the desk and shouted that I would never belong in her world of privilege and discipline. I expected her to scold me, maybe even threaten to send me back. Instead, she leaned against the doorway, her face expressionless, and said in that firm, unyielding voice, "Your circumstances changed through no action of your own. But your response to those circumstances is your choice. You can use this opportunity, or you can waste it. The decision is yours. But I do not invest in lost causes." Those words hit harder than any punishment. They were blunt, perhaps even cold. But beneath them, I heard the truth. She believed I had potential, and she refused to let me throw it away. From that night, I realized perfection wasn't the shield I thought it was. My parents had left because of their own demons, not because I wasn't enough. Margaret was showing me something different. That control wasn't about erasing my feelings. It was about deciding who I would become despite them. Slowly, I started to change. I asked for a peer tutor with my allowance, something I never would have dared before. I organized study groups, stayed up late preparing for exams, and to my own shock found myself climbing the honor roll by junior year. Margaret didn't shower me with praise. Instead, she gave a small nod, the faintest lift of her chin, as if to say, "You're on the right track." And strangely, that meant more than applause. But her lessons weren't just about academics. She dragged me along to her business meetings, expecting me to sit quietly and observe. "Watch who speaks first," she whispered once as I scribbled notes on a legal pad. "Notice who concedes too quickly. Pay attention to who holds eye contact and who looks away. Business is just human psychology in practice." At 13-14, I didn't fully grasp it, but the seed was planted. I began to notice things the way people shifted when they lied, the subtle pauses that meant hesitation, the tiny signs of power and weakness in every conversation. Margaret was shaping me into more than a student. She was building me into someone who could not be broken by charm, lies, or manipulation. Someone who could stand in a room full of people trying to take what was hers and not flinch. And this is where I want to pause and ask you, yes, you listening right now. Have you ever had someone in your life who taught you lessons you didn't appreciate until years later? Share it in the comments. Tell us about the teacher mentor or even the strict guardian who left a mark. And if you believe these lessons matter, hit subscribe. This community is built on stories like ours. Margaret's teaching wasn't easy, it wasn't warm, but it was real. She believed in showing up and holding me accountable and giving me the tools to survive even if I didn't want them at the time. And though I wouldn't admit it then, I craved it. After being abandoned, after being told I wasn't worth staying, for having someone who refused to give up on me, even if it came wrapped in criticism, was a lifeline. Her voice still echoes in my mind even now. Life doesn't ask if you're ready, it asks if you're willing. And when the chance comes, you do not waste it. That lesson carried me through high school, into college, and eventually into the business world she had built with her own hands. It also prepared me for something much darker the moment my parents would return, smiling as though nothing had happened, ready to test whether I had truly learned how to stand my ground. But back then, as a teenager desperate to prove I belonged, all I knew was that Margaret's hard edges were slowly reshaping mine. And every day she was teaching me the same silent promise. I was not a lost cause. By the time I turned 18, the girl who once hid behind perfect grades just to keep her parents from leaving had transformed into someone new. I had stopped searching crowds for my mother's blonde hair or my father's familiar walk. I no longer drafted imaginary conversations where they apologized and took me home. With Margaret's relentless discipline and my own stubborn determination, I was standing on my own 2 feet. College applications became the battlefield where our wills clashed most fiercely. I dreamed of following my friends to the state university close to the familiar. Margaret insisted on something bigger. "Your friends are thinking about comfort," she told me. "You need to think about building your future. Comfort does not prepare you for survival." We fought bitterly. I accused her of trying to control me. She countered that I was wasting potential by shrinking back into my comfort zone. Finally, in the middle of one argument, She cut through the noise with words that silenced me. "I never asked to be your guardian," she said coolly. "But I took on the responsibility. And I am trying to give you options your parents never had. That is not control. That is love." That was the first time I realized that love could be blunt, even brutal. She was not asking me to obey. She was demanding that I rise. I applied to 7 universities and was accepted at 5. Eventually, I chose Northwestern to study business and marketing. Margaret wrote the tuition checks without complaint, though I knew the cost was enormous. And so I stepped into a new chapter carrying her voice like armor. College brought freedom I had never tasted before. For the first time, I could stay up late without someone demanding a current event at dinner. I could skip piano practice, eat junk food at midnight, even miss breakfast without consequence. Yet Margaret's influence trailed me like a shadow. When classmates panicked over deadlines, I kept to the habits she drilled into me: structure, order, consistency. And it paid off. I joined clubs, discovered I had a knack for design and marketing strategy, and built friendships beyond the bubble of my past. Summers, I returned to Margaret's company interning in different departments. She insisted I learn everything from vendor negotiations to inventory systems. I hated the long hours at first, but I began to see the bigger picture. This was more than a business, it was a kingdom she had built from scratch. And she was teaching me to inherit it, not just by name, but by competence. What surprised me most during those years was how distance softened us. Weekly phone calls became less formal. Sometimes she even laughed. And when I graduated with honors, her pride shone in her eyes, though she limited herself to a firm handshake and a single nod. It was enough. After graduation, I returned home and stepped into the role of marketing director at her company. By then, I no longer felt like an outsider in her world. We developed a rhythm, 2 independent women sharing meals, managing a company, sometimes even sharing silence in the garden over morning coffee. I dated occasionally, though. Margaret had a way of quietly discouraging anything that might derail my career. At the time, I resented it. Now I understand she wanted to protect me from being tied to someone who couldn't stand beside me as an equal. Looking back, those years marked the turning point where I finally felt not just sheltered by Margaret, but shaped by her. She had taken the broken pieces of a girl abandoned at 13 and molded her into a woman who could hold her own. And though neither of us said it aloud, I knew what we were building together: a legacy. But life, as it always does, had another twist prepared. Because just when I began to believe the ground beneath me was steady, illness would strike, and Margaret, the rock of my existence, would begin to fade. The news came quietly, as life-shattering news often does. I was 26, working late in the office on a marketing campaign when Margaret called me into her study. She rarely interrupted me during work hours, so the sound of her voice, calm, measured, sent a chill down my spine. She closed the door, folded her hands on the mahogany desk, and looked at me with eyes that carried none of their usual steel. "Rachel," she said, "the doctors found something. Pancreatic cancer." 2 words that seemed impossible, almost cruel. Margaret had always been the unmovable force in my life, untouchable, indestructible. But now the doctors gave her months, maybe a year. I remember gripping the arm of my chair, searching her face for a crack, a sign of fear. There was none. Only determination. "We all die," she told me that night. "The only variables are when and how we use the time before it happens." She carried on with her life as though death were just another meeting penciled into her calendar. She kept working, attending board meetings, signing contracts, even as her body weakened. But slowly, quietly, our roles reversed. I became the one setting medication reminders, arranging doctor visits, ensuring meals were eaten. For years, she had enforced my discipline. Now I enforced hers. And something unexpected happened during those months. The walls Margaret had built around her emotions began to crack. One evening, as I helped her into bed, her hand gripped mine with surprising strength. Her voice, usually clipped and precise, trembled. "You were the daughter I never allowed myself to have. Taking you in was the best decision of my life." Those words cut through me. Margaret had never once said she loved me, never once called herself my mother. Yet in that moment she gave me both. The illness stripped away her armor, revealing the woman beneath the one who had fought for me in court, who had driven me to tutoring sessions, who had sat silently with me through tears she could not stop. She had loved me all along in her way, and now with her strength fading, she finally allowed herself to admit it. 8 months later, she was gone. She died in her sleep, her hand still curled around the blanket, as though reaching for one last bit of control. The funeral was small, attended mostly by colleagues and a few distant relatives. I stood at the graveside, feeling as though the earth itself had tilted. The woman who had raised me, shaped me, saved me was gone. The mansion echoed with her absence. I caught myself listening for the sound of her heels on the hardwood saving news articles, to show her setting an extra place at the table, before realizing she would never sit there again. Grief came in waves, unpredictable and merciless. But even in my mourning, I felt her presence in the routines she had drilled into me. Get up, face the day, handle the responsibilities. She had prepared me for this moment without me knowing it. Running the company became my lifeline. Each decision, each negotiation was my way of honoring her. I could almost hear her voice guiding me. Notice who speaks first. Don't waste potential. Do not let fear make your choices. And yet grief has a way of leaving cracks in even the strongest armor. 3 weeks after the funeral, I walked into Mr. Whitman's office for the reading of her will, expecting paperwork and formality. Instead, when the door opened, I saw them, my parents, smiling as though nothing had happened, as though 15 years of silence could be erased with one reunion. It was in that instant, still raw from loss, that my past collided violently with my present. The parents who had left me were back, not with apologies, not with love, but with eyes fixed firmly on Margaret's fortune. And that was when I knew the hardest fight of my life was about to begin. But before I tell you what happened in that office, I want to leave you with this thought. Grief does not end when someone dies. Sometimes it sharpens into clarity. Sometimes it forces you to confront truths you have avoided. Have you ever faced that moment where loss pulled back the curtain on people's true intentions? Share it in the comments, and if you want to follow this journey to its shocking twist, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. 3 weeks after Margaret's funeral, I found myself walking up the marble steps of Mr. Whitman's downtown office. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, traffic horns, hurried footsteps, snippets of conversation, but inside me there was only silence. I carried grief in my chest, like a stone, and now I was about to carry her legacy as well. I thought the will reading would be simple, a formality. Margaret had never been one for sentiment. She believed in documents and contracts and clear lines of responsibility. I expected a quiet meeting, maybe a few signatures, perhaps mention of her employees or a charitable donation. I dressed in the navy suit she once said, commanded respect, wanting to make her proud. Mr. Whitman greeted me warmly, his silver hair and steady eyes offering some comfort. His office smelled of leather and polished wood, lined with shelves that had witnessed thousands of life-altering moments. He gestured to a chair, and I sat flipping through a business magazine without really seeing the pages. My heart beat heavy in my ears. Then the door opened. I looked up expecting one of Margaret's executives, or maybe her longtime housekeeper. Instead, time collapsed around me. Standing in the doorway were two faces I had convinced myself I would never see again. My parents. For a moment, I could not breathe. My father had aged, his hair now thin and gray, his once strong frame softened. My mother's face was sharper, her eyes tired, her clothes slightly out of style. Yet their smiles were too bright, too rehearsed. "Rachel," my father said, his voice rougher but familiar. "Look at you all grown up." My mother rushed forward, pulling me into an embrace before I could react. Her perfume was the same cloying and heavy as scent from another life. I stood stiffly, unable to return it. 15 years of silence could not be erased with a hug. She stepped back, eyes scanning me with a mixture of pride and calculation. "We've been trying to find you," she said softly. "You look so much like Margaret now. So sophisticated." Questions burned inside me, but only one escaped. "How did you know about this meeting?" "We saw the obituary," my father explained, attempting a sad smile. "We've kept tabs from afar. We knew you were with Margaret." Of course they knew. All these years they had known where I was, and never once did they reach out. My stomach turned. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. "Please, everyone, have a seat. We'll begin shortly." An older woman entered, then Mrs. Clark, Margaret's housekeeper for over 20 years. She gave me a sympathetic nod and sat far from my parents. Their presence seemed to sour the air itself. As we waited, my parents tried small talk. "We live in Arizona now," my mother offered. The climate helps your father's arthritis. My father added, I manage a convenience store. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. I nodded, but my mind screamed. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here because Margaret had left behind something worth millions. Their timing said everything. I studied them carefully. My mother's dress clung awkwardly, her knuckles white as she clutched her purse. My father's shoulders slumped, but his eyes darted constantly toward Mr. Whitman's stack of files. I had learned from Margaret to read people, to watch the small details. And every detail told me the same story: they had not come for me. Inside me, grief collided with rage. This was supposed to be about Margaret, about honoring her life and legacy. Instead, it was about to become a battlefield. I straightened in my chair, steadying myself. Whatever came next, I would not crumble. I would not be that abandoned 13-year-old again. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Mr. Whitman adjusted his glasses, the air in the room tightening as he opened the thick folder in front of him. My parents leaned forward slightly, their movements subtle but telling. I could feel the anticipation radiating from them, their breaths shallow, their smiles stretched too thin. They were waiting for numbers, not memories. We are here, Mr. Whitman began formally to execute the last will and testament of Margaret Hughes. His voice carried the authority of decades, calm and unwavering. He glanced at me, then back at the pages. To my niece, Rachel Hughes, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes the property at Lakeview Drive and its contents. My ownership shares of Hughes Home Collections, valued at approximately $12 million. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds totaling approximately $2 million. Personal effects, including jewelry, artwork, and automobiles, and all intellectual property related to my business ventures. The room fell silent. I had expected to inherit something. Of course, Margaret had made it clear I would continue her work. But I had not realized the true scale of her wealth. $12 million in business shares, $2 million in liquid assets, real estate worth millions more. It was overwhelming, heavy, like a crown placed on my head before I was ready. I barely had time to process when my father cleared his throat. Excuse me, Mr. Whitman. Is there anything else? Whitman looked at him over the rim of his glasses. There are smaller bequests to longtime employees, he explained, nodding toward Mrs. Clark, and instructions regarding charitable donations to be made annually from company profits. But the bulk of the estate passes to Rachel as stated. I saw my mother's smile falter, tightening into something brittle. She reached across the table, patting my hand with a gesture that felt invasive rather than affectionate. Well, this is quite a responsibility for someone so young, she said sweetly. Fortunately, as her parents, we are in a position to help. The words jolted through me like electricity. Parents. Help. After 15 years of silence, that was the role they chose to reclaim, now that millions of dollars were at stake. My father leaned back, trying to appear casual. Legally speaking, since Rachel was a minor when Margaret took her in, and there was never a formal termination of our parental rights, we remain her guardians. We'd be happy to assist with managing these assets until she has more experience. Panic rose in my chest. Guardians. My hands trembled under the table, but before I could speak, Mr. Whitman's voice cut through the room. I believe there is some confusion about legal status. I suggest we reconvene tomorrow at 2 o'clock, once I have prepared the relevant documentation. My parents exchanged quick glances, silent communication flashing between them. My mother smiled again too brightly. Of course. We're staying downtown. Rachel, perhaps we can meet for lunch before then to catch up properly. I couldn't answer. My throat was dry, my mind a storm. They stood gathering coats, lingering, as if waiting for me to soften. My father pressed a business card into my hand. Their numbers were scribbled on the back. Call anytime, day or night. We have 15 years to make up for. The door closed behind them, and I collapsed into the chair, hands shaking. My voice cracked as I turned to Whitman. They can't really have any claim, can they? His expression was grave. Your aunt anticipated this possibility. She left contingency plans, but I need time to assemble them. Prepare yourself for a difficult conversation tomorrow. Mrs. Clark rose, quietly resting a hand on my shoulder. Your aunt was a wise woman, she said softly. Trust that she would never leave you unprotected. Her words offered comfort, but dread still coiled in my stomach. For 15 years I had dreamed of my parents' return. And now here they were, smiling, charming, and already plotting to take everything Margaret had built for me. It was no reunion, it was a siege. And I knew this was only the first battle. That evening, against every piece of advice Mr. Whitman had given me, I agreed to meet my parents for dinner. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was the last ember of hope still glowing inside me, whispering that they might offer an explanation worth hearing. But I needed answers. I needed to look them in the eye and ask why. The restaurant was one Margaret had often chosen for business meetings, an upscale Italian place with white tablecloths and a wine list that ran longer than the menu. I thought the public setting would keep things civil. When I arrived, they were already seated, my father standing with exaggerated courtesy to pull out my chair. My mother's face was softened with fresh makeup, her hair styled as if this night were an audition. "We ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir," my father announced. "Your mother always loved it." "I don't drink wine," I replied, asking the waiter for water instead. It was a small act of resistance, but it mattered. I wasn't going to slip into the role of the obedient child they remembered. For 20 minutes, we traded surface-level conversation. They asked about my job, my education, my friends. I answered in clipped sentences, studying them more than speaking. I wanted to catch a glimpse of the people I had once loved, but all I saw were strangers wearing familiar faces. Finally, my mother reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine. "Rachel, we owe you an explanation." My father nodded solemnly. "We were in a terrible place. I had gambling debts. Dangerous people were after me. Your mother was battling severe depression. We convinced ourselves you'd be safer with Margaret. You had nothing to offer but dysfunction," my mother added, her voice trembling. "She had money, stability. We thought it was best for you." The words dug deep, but not the way they expected. My throat tightened as I whispered, "You had yourselves. That's all I wanted." Silence hung between us. My father looked down at his plate, shame flickering across his features. Then he said, "I got help. I've been clean for 8 years. Your mother found the right medication. We've built a modest but stable life." My mother's eyes filled with tears. We thought about reaching out so many times, but we were ashamed. And the longer we waited, the harder it became to bridge the gap. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to feel relief. But something in their voices felt rehearsed, their sorrow just a little too polished. And then came the shift. "Margaret did well by you," my father said, twirling his fork in the pasta. "Better than we could have. And now she's left you set for life. The house alone must be worth $2 million. My mother leaned in. "Plus the business. It's overwhelming for someone your age. We could help you manage it. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Their words wrapped themselves in care, but the core was transparent. They hadn't come to reconnect. They had come for money. "What exactly are you asking?" I said bluntly. They faltered, surprised by my directness. My father recovered first. "We're not asking for anything," he said, though his tone betrayed him. My mother hesitated, then blurted, "But if you wanted to help us? $70,000 to pay off our mortgage and another $30,000 for medical bills. $100,000 would change our lives." Cold clarity washed over me. So that was the price of reunion, $100,000. I leaned back, my voice steady. And what about my problems? The 15 years of silence, the therapy bills, the nightmares. What's the price tag for those? My mother's tears fell harder. Money can't fix the emotional damage. We just want a chance to be a family again. But my father's jaw tightened. This fortune came from our family originally. Our parents gave Margaret seed money. That wealth should have been shared. I thought of Margaret, who had clawed her empire into existence with 16-hour days, who had never taken shortcuts, who had saved me when they wouldn't. My voice cut through the table like a knife. She built that fortune herself. Biology is not an entitlement program. They exchanged a look, frustration cracking through their polished act. My mother whispered, "Think about what family really means, sweetheart. We all make mistakes." I stared at them, realizing fully what Margaret had prepared me for. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was a transaction. And the sooner I accepted that, the sooner I could protect myself from them. Dinner ended in strained silence, but their performance was far from over. I barely slept that night. Their words replayed in my head like a broken record, their pleas, their excuses, their carefully packaged sorrow. But beneath all of it, I heard the same refrain: money. They wanted what Margaret had left me, and they were willing to dress it up as reconciliation. Around 3 a.m, I wandered into Margaret's study, the one room I hadn't touched since the funeral. Her presence lingered there, the faint scent of her perfume, the stacks of neatly labeled files, the pen she always kept capped on her desk. My hands shook as I opened the drawers, searching for something, Anything that might explain why Mr. Whitman had looked so grave when my parents spoke of guardianship. At the back of the lowest drawer, I found a locked folder with a single word written across the front: Winter's my last name. Inside was a history I never knew existed: reports from private investigators, court documents, letters, and at the very top, a sealed envelope with my name in Margaret's precise handwriting. My chest tightened as I slid my finger under the seal. "My dearest Rachel," it began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and your parents have returned. This is not a coincidence. Over the years, they attempted to extract money from me, using you as leverage. 6 months after you came to live with me, your father demanded $50,000 in exchange for not challenging the guardianship. I paid it against my better judgment. He returned 3 years later, asking for more. When you were 16, your mother claimed she had cancer and needed treatment money. It was a lie. I blocked further attempts to protect you from manipulation. They will likely try again now through guilt legal threats or emotional appeals." My eyes blurred, but I kept reading. "Rachel, you must know this. When you turned 16, I formally adopted you. I chose not to change your name, hoping reconciliation might someday be possible, but you have been legally my daughter since then. Your parents hold no claim to you or your inheritance. Whatever decision you make about a relationship with them must be yours alone, but do not let blood ties bind you to those who abandoned you. Family is built through sacrifice, not DNA. I am proud of the woman you have become. Trust your judgment. All my love, Margaret." I pressed the letter to my chest, sobs breaking free. Margaret had protected me even beyond death. Every suspicion I had about my parents' motives was confirmed. The next day I arrived at Mr. Whitman's office with the file in hand. My parents were already there, accompanied by a slick-haired attorney named Hoffman. My father's expression was carefully neutral, but I saw the flash of recognition in his eyes when he spotted the folder I carried. Hoffman began smoothly. "My clients are concerned about their daughter inheriting such substantial assets without proper oversight. As her legal guardians—" "Stop right there," Mr. Whitman interrupted, pulling out his own stack of documents. "There seems to be confusion about legal status. Temporary guardianship was terminated years ago. Rachel was adopted by Margaret Hughes at age 16. I have the court orders here signed and sealed." My mother paled, her voice trembling. "We never agreed to that. Someone must have forged our signatures." Whitman slid photographs across the table, surveillance images of my father at casinos during the time he was supposedly unreachable, my mother working as a cocktail waitress. Reports detailing how both had explicitly confirmed to investigators that they wanted no responsibilities over me. Evidence of a payment of $15,000 from a man named Barker the very next day after signing away their rights. The room grew heavy with silence. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's hands shook. And then I opened Margaret's letter. My voice was steady as I read aloud the parts that mattered: the extortion attempts, the false cancer claim, the blocked emails begging for tuition money. By the time I finished, my parents sat slumped in their chairs, their attorney whispering frantically. Whitman closed the folder with finality. "Any legal challenge will trigger a clause in Margaret's will. The entire estate would be transferred to a charitable foundation. You would gain nothing." That was the moment the mask cracked. My father's face twisted with anger. "You paid us off and stole our daughter," he snarled. I met his gaze without flinching. "No, you sold me. Margaret raised me, and she made sure I would never belong to you again. For 15 years I had carried the wound of abandonment, hoping someday for an explanation. And here it was ugly and undeniable. They had left because money mattered more than I did, and now they had returned for the very same reason." The tension in Mr. Whitman's office was thick enough to choke on. My parents sat across from me, their attorney whispering frantically into my father's ear, but I could see it in their faces, the realization that Margaret had outmaneuvered them even from the grave. For years, they had thought of me as unfinished business, a loose thread they could tug on when money was at stake. Now that thread had turned into a steel chain they could not break. Mr. Whitman slid one final set of papers across the table. "Here are the adoption documents, fully executed, properly filed. Rachel has been Margaret's legal daughter since the age of 16. You forfeited all parental rights long ago." His tone was calm, precise, and devastating. My mother's voice cracked as she tried to protest. We never agreed to this. Someone must have tricked us." Whitman's eyes hardened. "All communications are documented, including your signed consent. And in case you're thinking of challenging the authenticity, Margaret left recordings of your phone calls demanding money. Every attempt at extortion is on file. If you press further, you not only lose, but you risk criminal liability. My father's mask finally shattered. He slammed his fist on the table, his voice raw with rage. "This is ridiculous. She's our daughter. You can't just erase that." I leaned forward, meeting his glare. My hands no longer trembled. "You erased that the day you walked out. Margaret didn't steal me. You abandoned me." And she picked up the pieces you left behind. For a moment, silence engulfed the room. My mother sobbed quietly, whispering that they had been sick, broken, overwhelmed. My father stared at me with eyes that once held authority, but now looked desperate. "Listen, Rachel," he began again, his voice shifting into the smooth persuasion of a salesman. "We made mistakes, yes, but we are still family. Blood matters. You'll regret turning your back on us." Blood. The word echoed in my head like poison. Margaret had shown me another truth, that family isn't measured by blood, but by presence, by sacrifice, by actions. And by that measure, they were nothing to me. "I used to dream about you coming back," I admitted, my voice steady, but heavy with years of buried pain. "I thought maybe there would be a reason, an apology, something that would make the years make sense. But you didn't come back for me. You came back for money. That tells me everything I need to know." Mr. Whitman pressed a discreet button under his desk. 2 security officers appeared at the door. "Unless there's any further legal business," he said smoothly, "I think this meeting is concluded." My father shot to his feet, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over. We'll fight you. We'll make your life miserable." I stood too, but my voice was calm, sharper than his anger. 15 years you had the chance to fight for me. You didn't. Don't pretend now." Security escorted them out, their protests echoing down the hall. For a long moment, I stayed frozen, staring at the empty chairs they left behind. Whitman came around the desk and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Margaret wanted me to tell you something in case this day came. I was not only her attorney, I am also your godfather. She asked me to keep watching out for you after she was gone." The weight of his words sank deep. Even in death, Margaret had left me surrounded by her protection. My throat tightened, but I managed to whisper, "She thought of everything." Whitman nodded. "She did, and now it's up to you to decide how to live with the freedom she secured." That night, my parents appeared again, this time at the gates of Margaret's mansion, their rental car idling in the driveway. When the doorbell rang, I felt a strange calm. I no longer feared them. I no longer longed for them. I simply wanted closure. I opened the door, blocking the entrance with my body. My voice was firm. "You have 5 minutes. Say what you came to say. Then you leave, or I call the police." The final confrontation had begun. They stood on the porch of Margaret's mansion, my mansion, now dressed in the desperation they could no longer hide. My father's jaw was set in anger, my mother's eyes brimming with tears that looked practiced. For a moment we faced each other in silence, the night air heavy with tension. "You can't keep shutting us out," my father snapped, his voice already rising. "We are your parents. You owe us at least a conversation without lawyers breathing down your neck." I held the doorframe steady, unyielding. "I don't owe you anything, but I'll give you 5 minutes. After that, I call the police." My mother slipped past me into the foyer, her eyes darting across the grand staircase, the antique furniture, the paintings Margaret had collected. It wasn't me she was looking at, it was the life Margaret had built. "We just want to understand why you're being so cold," she said, her voice cracking. "Yes, we made mistakes, but we're here now, trying to make amends." I stepped closer, my words sharp. "By trying to take my inheritance, that's your way of making amends." My father pushed inside too, ignoring my boundary. His face was flushed, his composure gone. "That woman poisoned you against us. Margaret always resented me. She used you to hurt me." "No," I shot back, my voice trembling but strong. "She saved me. She gave me stability, education, and self-respect. She showed me that love is proven by actions, not excuses." My mother's tears spilled over, her voice breaking. "We did love you. We were sick. Depression is an illness. Gambling is an addiction. We needed help, not judgment." Something inside me snapped. I was 13 years old. I didn't need excuses. I needed parents. "Do you know what it was like to wake up and find you gone? To wait by the phone praying for a call that never came? To check the mailbox every single day for months, hoping for a letter, a birthday card, anything that said, 'I still mattered to you'?" My father looked away, his eyes hard. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing, but I didn't stop. The years of silence poured out of me like a flood. Margaret never once told me she loved me. I said, my voice quieter now, steadier. But she was there every doctor's appointment, every school play, every nightmare. She didn't need to say the words because she showed them every single day. That's what love looks like. My father tried again, his voice shifting into that salesman's persuasion I knew too well. We can still build something, Rachel. Support each other as a family. You'll see blood matters. One day you'll regret cutting us off. I stared at him, and for the first time I felt nothing. No longing, no hope, just clarity. If Margaret had died poor, would you even be here? Their silence was the only answer I needed. Police lights flashed through the window as a patrol car pulled into the driveway precisely as Mr. Whitman had arranged, knowing this confrontation might come. My father grabbed my arm, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. We can ruin her reputation. We can make your life hell. I pulled away, pointing at the security camera in the corner. Every threat is being recorded. Margaret prepared for this years ago. You can't hurt me anymore. His face paled as the reality set in. He muttered to my mother, she's not worth the trouble. My mother turned back at the door, her voice sharp through her tears. One day you'll regret this, Rachel. Money won't keep you warm at night. Family is everything. I held her gaze. You're right. Family is everything. That's why Margaret was my family. You were just biological donors who left before the job was done. The police escorted them out, their protests fading into the night. When the door closed, I sank against it, my chest heaving. The battle was over. For the first time, I felt not like an abandoned child, but like a woman who had chosen her own definition of family. Margaret had given me wealth, yes. But her real inheritance was something far greater, the strength to stand firm, the clarity to cut out toxicity, and the freedom to define love on my own terms. And that is the story I needed to tell. If you've ever faced betrayal or abandonment, know this. You are not defined by those who left you. You are defined by those who stay, those who show up, those who keep their promises. If this story struck something in you, subscribe to this channel because I have more stories that will remind you of your strength. And when you're ready, watch the next video. It might just be the perspective you need tonight. When the door closed that night and silence finally filled the halls, I walked slowly through the mansion, my mansion feeling the weight of everything Margaret had left me. Not just the walls, not just the gardens, not just the company that now carried my name. She had left me something far greater, the courage to define my own life. I paused in her study, where her favorite books still lined the shelves, and her chair remained pushed neatly beneath the desk. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the sting of her absence. I felt her presence instead woven into every detail of the home she had built. Grief no longer swallowed me whole. Instead, it became something quieter, gentler, like a shadow at my side. I understood now what Margaret had been trying to teach me all along, that love is proven by consistency, by choices repeated day after day, not by words spoken when convenient. I also realized that I wasn't alone. Mrs. Clark still visited, sharing old stories about Margaret. Mr. Whitman checked in like the godfather she had secretly appointed him to be. Even the employees of the company, many of whom had worked under Margaret for decades, looked at me with a respect that came not from bloodline, but from trust I had earned. That night I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens and whispered a thank you into the wind. Not just to Margaret, but to the younger version of myself who had endured the silence, the hunger, the abandonment, and still kept going. Family isn't always who you are born to. Sometimes it is who chooses to stay. And as I carried Margaret's lessons forward, I knew one thing with certainty. I was free to build a life rooted not in loss, but in love.